an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoile Me, covering the first 44 pages of Sunshine by Robin McKinley, sponsored by Rosie Kolb. In this episode, I talk about a bizarre world where vampires, demons, they all walk among us, but they aren't liked. Welcome to Spoile Me. All right, everybody, welcome to Spoile Me. First episode covering this new book, Sunshine, which I had never heard of before. And thank you very much for Rosie for sponsoring. She's actually going to be sponsoring the entire book. So if there have been a couple things on Spoile Me that you aren't sure you want to invest your time in because you don't know if I'll even get to the end of it, I think that you're safe on this one. So I'll include a link to Amazon to buy the book if you're interested. And I recommend it because I liked this like opening section, and it was really strange too. And I'm always here for strange because it gets my attention. And this is the kind of book that I would be interested to hear other people's thoughts on also. And especially as we go along, because, it seems pretty like there's a lot of playing with mythologies here, and I really enjoy that kind of thing. So let's get started. The opening of the book, I'm going to find the exact opening here because it starts off, it was a dumb thing to do, but it wasn't that dumb. There hadn't been any trouble out at the lake in years, and it was so exquisitely far from the rest of my life. Now, this starts off feeling like there's a secret thing where she gets jumped by these beings that we didn't know it was vampires, but somebody had gotten murdered by the lake. Like, that's the impression that I got from this opening, was that the trouble by the lake was murders or like some kind of activity that felt like occultish, but it was human beings. And then as we get further into the story, it becomes very clear that that's not what was going on. She goes finally out to the lake, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but there's a really nice way that the story is handled that I like a lot, because those of you who are kind of into like urban fantasy and paranormal stuff, the idea of it's our world, but vampires are real and demons are real and they walk among us is not an original idea. That's something that has been done. It's all over the place. And a lot of times it can feel incredibly goofy, like not real. And what I liked about the way that this book started is that we actually get insight into who she is as a person before anything else. And I say she, help me out here, Rosie, because I can't remember this main character's first name because she barely talks to anybody. So Ray, okay, thank you. Ray is the daughter of a very strong-willed woman who left her husband and built her own business and just made shit happen by sheer force of personality. And Ray is somebody who did not do well in school and just one of those people. And I feel like I always like when books focus on this kind of person, when there are people out there who we just don't know what we want to do with our lives right away. And I say we, even though I fall into a slightly different category because I had some like obvious talents that lent themselves to certain things, but it still wasn't like I didn't know that I wanted to do that kind of thing. It was other people sort of pushing me in that direction. But Ray didn't do well in school. She didn't like school. And when she, like, was able to work, like, as soon as she could, around 12 years old, I think she says, is when she first starts working in this coffee shop that her mother owns. And then she starts to take on more and more and more tasks. And Charlie, who I think it's like, is it his coffee shop, Rose? Because I'm saying that her mom started it, but I feel like they jointly did this. He starts to sense that Ray's like straying out into the areas of teenage behavior that could get her into some serious trouble. So what he decides to do, which she doesn't realize until like, you know, later, as she's grown up, hindsight, she's realizing what he did. Charlie gives her the job that like gets her out of bed earliest in the morning, that gives her, she's somebody that everybody kind of depends on for everything to run smoothly, because she has to get up at 4 a.m. and go in and make the best-selling cinnamon buns and the muffins and all of this stuff. So the place isn't going to run if she doesn't get there and get things started. And apparently that worked for her. Having people depend on her, having something that was really like quantifiable that she could do, was much more helpful to her than studying at school a bunch of subjects that didn't seem actually relevant to her life. So right there we learn she's a very practical person, which I can relate to. Like, I like studying things in theory to a point, but I'm pretty practical also. And yeah, so she is working at this place, and we just get this like intro that I'm not sure if this would work for everyone, because some people are a lot more impatient than I am when it comes to like, I'm getting into this book about paranormal stuff and I just want the weirdness up front. And it takes a little while to get into that, but it's really not very long. And I think setting it up this way, where we're looking at her life, which feels very ordinary and very relatable and very, it's different than, you know, getting dropped into the point of view of somebody who's like a private investigator for werewolves or something that is so esoteric and strange that it's hard to relate to that, you know? So I thought that was a really good method of dropping us into this strange world that could feel really, what's the word I want? It could feel really cliche without having it told from the right point of view. So, and she, moved out also from living with her mother as soon as she could, because she really, really likes living alone, and her mom drives her a little crazy, which I think we can all appreciate and relate to. That you can love your parents, but that doesn't mean that they don't drive you banana pants sometimes. And she is, like, her mother kind of has a problem with the fact that she moved out so soon, because her mother is very protective of her, despite being probably the example that Ray follows in terms of being somebody who is strong-willed and wanting to do things on her own. And her mother, I would think, instilled that in her. Ray is like, you know, doing exactly what she was taught to do, and her mother's kind of like, well, you don't need to do that. You can still live with me. And I kind of enjoy that too, because it shows that while her mother is a driven person and wants her daughter to be driven, she's also still trying to be a parent and not push her too hard and not make her feel like you're on your own, which is a very fine line to walk. So Rose is saying, I like how it's focused on all the ordinary stuff and the paranormal things are mentioned almost in passing. Yeah, so that's part of, she, like, in describing who she is, and this is a really funny line considering that we get into vampires later. She's just talking about how she moved out, and the landlady that she wound up with named Miss Yolanda, who she has, like, gotten to be close enough with that she just calls her Yolanda. And Yolanda is a big fan of hers and dropped her price in rent because she brings home baked goods all the time. And there's a line here where she says, I have that dominant feed people gene that I think you have to survive, that I think you have to have to survive in the small restaurant business. Which is part of why I almost went into being a baker. And then I realized the next line is, you sure aren't doing it for the money or the hours. And I decided, yeah, the money or the hours, as much as I have that feed people gene, I'll do that personally. I'll do that on a one-on-one level rather than a business level. So here we go with, I'm going to get into the whole thing because she mentions again, this is so funny to me. I took my tea and toast and Immortal Death, a favorite comfort book since under the covers with flashlight reading at the age of 11 or 12. Back to bed when I finally woke up at early noon, and even that really Spartan scene where the heroine escapes the dark others who have been pursuing her for 300 pages by calling on her demon heritage, finally, and turning herself into a waterfall didn't cheer me up. Okay. I am dying to know if this is a reference to something that I'm reading right now, and I kind of want to ask Robin McKinley about it. But I am sort of hate reading it at this point. I started an audiobook called A Discovery of Witches, which I would not recommend to anybody. It's incredibly long. It's very, very drawn out, and hardly anything has happened yet, and I'm like 2/3 of the way through it. And overall, it's super frustrating because it's about a witch with like tons of powers who doesn't want to use her powers just because she's got like weird baggage. And you're just waiting for her to fucking figure shit out and defend herself. Oh my God. And there is a point where she begins to turn into water. And water is pouring out of her mouth and out of her fingertips and out of her hair. And she almost like disappears into it and just vanishes as a person. And I really want to know if that is what this author is like kind of referencing with that, because I could not stop laughing. I had just, when I read this part of this book, I had finished that scene in Discovery of Witches like 2 hours earlier, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, is that, or maybe it's just such a cliched thing that it feels like they're referencing a bunch of stuff because many, many writers have scenes like that. But yeah, so I cracked up over that. And I really enjoy also that we're in a book that's like a paranormal fantasy, urban fantasy story, and she's referencing other urban fantasy books, which feels like she's lampshading the whole thing a little bit, which I'm always here for. I don't enjoy lampshading when it seems like we're doing this in order to excuse the fact that we made a really stupid, like, either mistake or contrived moment. But I do like it when it's done in this sort of way where we're like, yeah, we know you've seen this kind of story before, but we're going to talk about this anyway. So she's just really, really frustrated with everybody at work today. And they all have like a day where they sit and watch movies and just hang out and try and decompress. But when she turns up for a movie day, it's like clear as soon as she walks in that she is, either she or somebody else there is going to go off at some point because everybody's acting really impatient and tense and not cool. So she decides, you know what? I'm not going to do this. And she decides to go off by herself down to her parents' lake house. And she talks about the lake house being really abandoned. And the reason that it's abandoned is because the whole lake area was abandoned after what she calls the Voodoo Wars. And I'm going to read this. When I was 10, the Voodoo Wars started. They were, of course, nothing about voodoo, but they were about a lot of bad stuff, and some of the worst of them in our area happened around the lake. A lot of the cabins got burned down or leveled one way or another, and there were a few places around the lake where you still didn't go if you didn't want to have bad dreams or worse for months afterward. Mostly because of those bad spots, although also because there simply weren't as many people to have vacation homes anywhere anymore. After the wars were over and most of the mess cleared up, the lake never really caught on again. The wilderness was taking over, which was a good thing because it meant that it could. There were a lot of places now where nothing was ever going to grow again. It was pretty funny, really. The only people who ever went out there regularly were the super greens to see how the wilderness was getting on, and if, as the urban population of things like raccoons and foxes and rabbits and deer moved back out of town again, they started to look and behave like raccoons and foxes and rabbits and deer had used to look and behave. So we get a couple things here. Because there simply weren't as many people to have vacation homes anywhere anymore. And later on, she talks about how our cities become really popular, probably because it's one of the only cities left. And there's no detail for that, which I find to be a very effective way of writing. It can be done badly and done in such a way that it's like meant to really provoke you, but it feels so obvious or almost like pretentious is the wrong word, but just kind of smug that you're just like, oh God, okay, I get it. There's a mysterious thing. But this is done in such a conversational way, which is really how the writing is overall, that it feels much more natural because it doesn't seem like the reader's being baited. It seems like this is how a person who's lived in this reality forever would talk about it, because they're assuming that whoever's listening or they themselves know what's going on already. So like I said, this is a very fine line, and I feel like it was done really well here. There is, however, I'm going to say this about the writing. Sometimes the writing can get weirdly like clunky and confusing because she does run-on sentences, because I think she's doing this conversational style. So it can feel like there were a few moments where I had to pull back and like reread something because I was like, I don't get what that was even supposed to mean at all. So for example, that sentence that I just read, the only people who ever went out there regularly were the super greens, comma, to see how the wilderness was getting on, comma, and if, as the urban population of things like raccoons and foxes and rabbits and deer moved back out of town again, comma, they started to look and behave like foxes and raccoons and rabbits and deer had used to look and behave. That's a long fucking sentence. And there's another one here, and this is a full paragraph, but it's like all one sentence. I'm looking at this and it's like crazy to me that it's one sentence. One of the origins of the Voodoo Wars was that the vampires, comma, tired of being the only ones of the big three, comma, major league other folk coherently and comprehensively legislated against, comma, created a lot of vampires that they left for us humans to look after and then organized them, hyphen, somehow, hyphen, into a wide-scale breakout. Okay, it's two sentences, period. Vampirism doesn't generally do a lot for your personality, hyphen, that is, comma, a lot of good, hyphen. And the vampires had chosen as many really nice people as possible to turn, comma, to emphasize their disenchantment with the present system. So, if you really are, like, focused, you can figure out, but it's like, there is so much changing or, like, parenthetical thought happening here that it can get a little bit confusing. But side note, I really enjoy that vampires are specifically going after really nice, awesome people in order to, like, fuck with people's heads, fuck with the heads of the people who are formerly nice, and, quote, emphasize their disenchantment with the present system. So, yeah, there are moments like that where I was just a little bit like, wow, you're doing a lot there with that one sentence. But, so, this description of what's happening here, there is so much, because this is all, like, her thinking about it as she's sitting on the front porch of the lake house that her family owns, which is still standing, and still, like, probably could be habitable, but nobody wants to live out here, and the place is in disrepair. So, there are the vampires, who are the ones that are flat out legislated against. She says earlier that it's technically illegal to be a vampire, but they are also the ones who hold like 30% of the world's wealth or something. So vampires are the 1%, which is something that is a pretty common trope, but I really like that she zeroes in on what it would be like as a human being who is aware vampires are real and living among us, to also be aware that vampires are the ones who hold all the money. because that is a damn thing to, like, really think about, not just economically, but socially, what kind of resentment that would create. And she kind of gets into that and how upset it makes people, and that there's occasionally when it's a slow news day, they'll just post articles about the amount of wealth vampires have and what their holdings are and all this different, because it's something easy to get people to pick up the paper, because we all kind of want to know, even though we hate them for it, which seems true. And other than vampires, she talks about, she says the big three, some demons, and then says demon is a pretty catch-all term, really, and it can often turn out to mean what the law enforcement official on the other end of it wants to mean at the time. So that's pretty intense. Like, demon is just something that you can say about somebody in order to get them in trouble or justify your arrest or whatever. And I'm really curious about how that plays out. Because there's a lot of discussion about what, and there's so much that I just kind of want to read, like flat out read, about what's going on with demons and how some of them you can barely even tell what they are. So I'm wondering, is there ever an instance where a human being is arrested and gets accused of being a demon when they're not at all? I feel like that's gotta happen, right? And then there are what she just calls the wares. W-R-E-R. W-E-R-E. That's the one. And I feel like they are the ones that I'm most curious about at this point, because they're not werewolves. They're wares, which means that they turn into anything. And she discusses how there's a lot more stray cats around the coffee shop during the full moon. So they turn into cats, guys. We've got a bunch of McGonagalls running around. And I want to know what else they turn into. Because you can't always turn into something awesome, right? I wonder, because, sometimes with things like this they're paranormal, but they also try and root themselves in some kind of believability. Is there a rule that maybe human beings, if they're werehumans, can only turn into, let's say, I don't know, like other mammals, maybe? So they can't turn into lizards, or they can't turn into a housefly, or something really unfortunate. Imagine turning into a housefly and somebody just smacks you because they don't know. That'd be a bummer. So yeah, the wares have a kind of a better deal than some of the others, because there is an actual drug that helps them either avoid the change or just make it like way less painful if they want to do that. So that's kind of interesting that there's all sorts of science involved in dealing with the others. And she says, it's not that any of the others are really popular, or that it had only been the vampires against us during the wars. But a big point about vampires is that they are the only ones that can't hide what they are. Let a little sunlight touch them and they burst into flames. Very final flames. Exposure and destruction in one neat package. Wares are only in danger once a month, and there are drugs that will hold the change from happening. The drugs are illegal, but you can get them, which I find really interesting too. Why are they illegal? What is that about? Like, in what way are they a danger? Or is it that we've made them illegal so that they can't hide what they are? Like, is that another bit of anti-other legislation? Is that purposeful? And then she says, a lot of demons look perfectly normal. Most demons have some funny habit or other, but unless you live with one and catch it eating garden fertilizer or old combox components or growing scaly wings and floating 6 inches above the bed after it falls asleep, you'd never know. And some demons are pretty nice, although it's not something you want to count on. So that has to happen. It has to, right? False arrest and claiming somebody's a demon. Just because somebody could, like, there are also just disorders where people just eat glass and, like, do weird shit. You could be OCD and somebody thinks you're a demon. So, and then the rest of the others don't cause much trouble, at least not officially. It is pretty cool to be suspected of being a fallen angel. And everyone knows someone with Sprite or Perry blood. Tell me what Perry is. Sprite or Perry? Mary at the coffee house, for example. Everyone wants her to pour their coffee because coffee poured by Mary is always hot. She doesn't know where this comes from, but she doesn't deny it's some kind of other blood. So long as Mary sticks to being a waitress at a coffee house, the government turns a blind eye to this sort of thing. And then comes the thing that I'm really interested in. But if anyone ever manages to distill a drug that lets a vampire go out in daylight, they'll be worth more money in a month than the present total of all bank balances held by everyone on the Global Council. Yeah, so it feels like this world is only, like, you know, the Voodoo Wars was a clearly global thing, it seems like. And you could make a ton of money, apparently, by making this drug that allows vampires to travel out in daylight. But, like, you'd also, I think, be ensuring the destruction of the rest of the known world, right? Am I wrong? Not being able to travel out in daylight when vampires are not only super strong and utterly silent, but also hold, like, almost half the world's wealth. They are very much in power almost already. So maybe don't give them any more advantages, guys? You know, I'm just saying, like, the only reason that I could see somebody working on that is because they themselves are a vampire and need it. But if you're a regular person, what are you doing? Stop. Oh my God. You're turning yourself into a fucking blood farm, guys. So, yeah, when she mentioned that, I was just like, don't like that. And there's a couple of instances of very, like, slow used slang, I guess is the word. The word sheer is used. Earlier, her boyfriend Mel says something about she's just being sheer, or something about her mom. And then this one, leaving headquarters to sit on bogus human global council talks is just not sheer. So that's a weird one, but I'm going to keep an eye out for how that's used again. And let's jump to, like, the actual plot of this, because she's sitting there on the front step, and the next thing she knows, she's waking up around a campfire. And this is, I think, the way this is handled is really interesting, because it's a kind of a side note, but it's related, you'll see. So stay with me, guys. If you ever watch true crime shows, or not even true crime, if you ever watch, you know, procedurals, where it always starts with, we found a body. Oh my God, somebody's been murdered. Let's figure it out. And there's always that moment of the cops having to come and inform the family that so-and-so's been found dead. I'm sorry, can we ask you some questions? I always am surprised by the way media depicts people who have just been told that somebody's dead. It is impossible for me to imagine being in a state where the police could question me. Like, if somebody came to my door right now and told me, I'm sorry, there's been a terrible accident. Are you related to Owen Woody? I am sorry to tell you this. He's passed away. That's a wrap on the rest of the week. I am unavailable. Like, I'm not even sure if I would be crying so much as just catatonic. Impossible. Nope, not here. And yet in these shows, people are just so collected. And I know that for the sake of the show, they have to be, because we need the information as the audience, and the writers can't write a complete collapse with the fucking cops coming back later every time. Although maybe they should occasionally, because I've literally never seen that happen, not once. And I feel like it should here and there. But the moment where she wakes up and realizes that she's been captured and is surrounded by vampires, it's like she freezes up. She's so terrified. She can't scream. There's none of that. It's like this moment of, there's like later on she thinks about it as, I just came to this point where I was like, well, I guess this is it. I guess this is the end of the line. That sucks. And I feel like that's what would happen if you were in a moment taken by things that are not human. There's definitely the weeping and the crying and the begging for your life. Once you get to the point where you are about to be killed, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to try and say that I'm above that, because I wouldn't be. But I really like how there's a numbness for her at first, and she's just doesn't even know where her mind should go right now. It's like she's become detached from herself and the whole situation. And it's much worse for her in some ways, because this doesn't go quickly. It doesn't go the way that Ray expects it to go. Apparently, to get everybody up to speed, if you haven't read this, the reason that she doesn't remember what happened between being on the front porch and being captured by these vampires is because there are some that have what's called the breath, and they can breathe on you and send you to sleep. Basically, you pass out completely. You're unconscious. And not all vampires can do that. And if you can, you're super valuable when it comes to hunting. So they have a certain amount of clout socially within vampire circles. And they snuck up on her totally silently and apparently breathed on her before she even knew they were there, which is a really terrifying prospect. The idea that you could just be doing something and the next second wake up somewhere else because they were so quiet and snuck up on you so completely that you didn't get a glimpse of them. You didn't see their face in front of yours breathing on you. They could breathe on you from the side. God knows what. So that is super, super scary to me, that complete lack of control over anything and being utterly unaware of why you're mixed up and waking up somewhere until you see them or hear them. Because the vampires are described as having bizarre voices. That I find really interesting. Because, in all other mythology, pretty much, that I have read where they change up what's going on with vampires, the only one that I've read that had vampires' voices being much different than a regular human voice was the Dresden Files, and even then, only with Black Court vampires. There's White Court, Red Court, and Black Court. There's also a Jade Court. We don't know almost anything about them. But Black Court vampires are essentially like corpses, walking corpses. And when they talk, it's these really withered, dry vocal cords, and everything sounds painful and awful. That's the only one, though. And that is apparently not what's going on with these vampires. They just have a very distinct voice. And so you can tell before you even open your eyes what they are, even if, and I find this fascinating, you've never heard one before. Because Ray says that she has never seen a vampire in person or heard one speak. Apparently, if they are ever on the news, there's voice modulators that are used to kind of conceal identities, I guess, as part of it. But yeah, I'm just really, this whole idea of vampires she says that the only time that they can kind of blend in is at night. And even at night, you can tell that there is something different about them by the way that they move. So it can be kind of a game for people to sit out on in an outdoor cafe area and just watch people walking by and guess which ones are the vampires. So this whole thing with them sounding different and really looking different and just the overall sense of what they are being very obvious. They're not people who just look like particularly gorgeous human beings, they are clearly another whole deal. And then I'm going to read this whole thing because I find this so... there's just so much to this like intro thing that I find really, really interesting. I've never met a vampire before, nor heard one speak except on TV, where they run the voice through some kind of anti-glamour technology so no one listening will march out of their house and start looking for the speaker. Okay, so that's what it is. They use a modulator because vampires can control people with their voices, which is amazing. And there is, of course, a story, because there is always a story, that a master vampire can tune its voice so that maybe only one specific person of all the possible millions of people who hear a broadcast will jump out of their chair, etc. And then, in theory, I suppose I should have known these guys were I shouldn't have known these guys were vampires, but I did. If you've been kidnapped by the darkest others, you know it. In the first place, there's the smell. It's not at all a butcher shop smell, as you might expect, although it does have that metallic blood tang to it. But meat in a butcher shop is dead. I know this is a contradiction in terms, but vampires smell of live blood. And something else. I don't know what the something is. It's not any animal, vegetable, or mineral in my experience. It's not attractive or disgusting, although it does make your heart race. That's in the genes, I suppose. Your body knows its prey, even if your brain is fuddled by the breath or trying not to pay attention. So, the smell thing, because it's always, vampires can smell us. Vampires can smell human blood. Vampires can smell adrenaline when we're upset. Vampires can, tell all kinds of things by the smell of a human. But vampires smelling like something, that's new. I haven't come across that, and I love that. Thank you for doing something new. Just the whole idea of vampires being able to blend so seamlessly with regular people, I understand story-wise why that's a really tempting proposition as a writer, but I think it's so much more compelling to have this kind of thing where, yeah, we know what they are. Oh, please. Yeah, we're aware. It's just... it makes them more alien and less seductive, which is a nice change from what we're used to, where the whole thing with vampires is about them being seducers and being so beautiful that you can't resist. And it also makes it feel much more foreboding to be turned into one, where a lot of media, it's like, being a vampire really doesn't seem that bad. Get some blood bags, get some animals, whatever, you drink blood. What a shame. Oh, I'm sorry that you drink blood. We eat meat. It's the same thing, except it has to be alive. And you get, in exchange for that, eternal life, super speed, super strength, probably unfathomable wealth at some point. And also, usually, you get to be super gorgeous also. Yeah, that trade-off seems fine to me. Just fine. Especially if it's the kind of, mythology where they can still walk around in daylight and do all kinds of things that... turn me into a vampire. Sure, that's fine. I don't mind. But in this, they smell weird. They sound weird. They don't look like regular people. They don't move like regular people. That's different. You're getting cut off from your entire, your humanity, but in a much more substantial way that feels like a consequence, a real one, So I just really appreciate that, because I can get a little tired of how beautiful and glamorous vampires are. It's a lovely fantasy, but it is something that takes away a lot of the stakes to me in terms of being afraid of them, being afraid of becoming one of them, being afraid of getting involved with anything that has to do with them. Yeah, so she says, I'm told young ones can pass after dark. She says young ones. I didn't notice that the first time, but young ones. So they haven't completely gone over to the movements of a vampire. A popular way of playing chicken among humans is to go somewhere there's a rumor of vampires and see if you can spot one. I knew Kenny and his buddies had done this a few times. I did it when I was their age. It's not enormously dangerous if you stay in a group and don't go into the no man's land around the big cities. We're a medium-sized city, and as I say, we're pretty clean. It's still a dumb and dangerous thing to do. Dumber than my driving out to the lake should have been. The vampires around the bonfire weren't bothering not to move like vampires. So yeah, she wakes up and she's flipping out and kind of wondering whether or not her flipping out is just because of her situation or if that's a side effect of the breath and waking up, which is that's a question that I would like to have answered at some point. So these dudes are acting real weird, though. She thinks that they're going to bite her, obviously. And the way that, like, it's described earlier, vampire attacks are not these, like, simple glamorous things. They like to fuck with people. They like to torture people. They like to draw it out. It's not like I'm going to look into your eyes and pretend that I'm about to make out with you and you're going to be almost in a haze of desire and confusion as I suck the life from you so that you almost don't even know what's happening. No. It seems like this shit hurts and they enjoy that it hurts. And there's no sort of like regret there that she can tell. She says very specifically, there is no rumor about a good vampire. And none of my friends have ever like met and walked away from a vampire that decided that they didn't want to eat you, which really seems like in and of itself, that's a pretty good indicator of whether there's like a good vampire out there, which is a great segue into what happens to her. I figured this out pretty much immediately. So these dudes put her in a dress because they say in this offhand way that she doesn't understand, Beau says he's old-fashioned. So they give her this red charmeuse dress and drag her up to this huge, like, mansion lake house that she notices all of the trees have been cleared away from the outer property around it so that there is nothing that can cast shade. And right there I was like, oh shit. Either A, this is a fortress and he's trying to keep people from sneaking up, or this is a prison and he's trying to keep somebody from getting away. And then when we get inside, there is a vampire on the floor that's very thin and doesn't look great. And I was like, oh shit. So she was saying that there weren't any good vampires. It seems like this one's trying to be. This vampire is... They have him manacled to the wall, and she is put within his reach and has been made to look as attractive as they can. They pick somebody young and pretty and put her in a dress, and they leave her within arm's length. They also leave food for her, which she finds later and she thinks is weird. And it turns out what's going on here is that this is a vampire who is starving to death because they don't want to eat people. And Beau, whoever Beau is, he's the head badass vampire, he has put this guy into a situation where he will be tormented by a yummy, fresh, live human that all he needs to do is just go over there and take a bite. That's all he has to do and he'll be fine. But he clearly does not want to do that for whatever reason. And the fact that he says he's old-fashioned, I'm really curious about who this is, because if I hadn't gotten that line, I think I would have assumed this was a new vampire who had just been turned and they don't want to be part of this life. And so they've decided that they are just going to starve themselves. But the mention that, oh, he's old-fashioned makes me think that this is like an older vampire who has survived without eating people. And Beau resents that for some reason. and has decided to put him in this situation where he has no choice but to eat people if he wants to stay alive. And this whole thing was so surreal and strange. So, yeah, she's used as bait and as a method of torture. And this vampire, and help me out again here, Rosie, if you remember this vampire's name, because I don't know if we find out. Khan? That's it? Ray and Khan? Single syllable names? That's crazy to me. All right, so Khan is, she, like, obviously Ray, at one point, Khan asks her what her life is like, because he's trying to make conversation, and he says, remind me you're a rational being. So he wants her to remind him that she's a human so that he won't want to eat her. She starts talking about her life and understandably begins to sob cry, because you would. You're remembering all of the things about your life, that make it something special that means anything to you. And you're in a room with a vampire who is trying to fight its urge to eat you, and there is no way out. So she starts to cry, and this dude comes up and asks if he can have her tears, and collects them in his hands as she cries, and then drinks them and licks his fingers and whatnot. And it's the creepiest thing in the whole wide world. Yo. There's an episode of Angel that is like this, and I'm not going to get into it because I'm not sure if money has gotten to it yet, but it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen on television, period. Like, if you guys know what I'm talking about, I don't need to say any more than that, and if you don't, be glad, because I wish I could erase that episode from my memory because it's super, super upsetting. And this whole thing, because he says to her as he's like licking his fingers, it's not as good as blood, of course, but it's something. So this is again making me go like, does any bodily fluid, like if she had to pee, would he want that? That's a bummer, because they leave her bread and water, so there's going to be stuff happening. God knows when, but you know. So I'm just asking the questions that need asking. And he eventually, like, she asks him, like, why are you here? And he doesn't get into detail, but he just says, you know, I'm also a prisoner. Bo put me here. And she offers him some water. And he's like, why? He seems really weirded out by the fact that she's trying to help him. And she says, because I don't like bullies, which I really enjoy. This is a thinking lady. And she understands that this guy's as much of a victim as she is, in a way, despite being a vampire. He's being fucked with just as badly as she is. So I like that. And then what he wants for her to do is tell him stories to get them through the worst parts, because they're going to be stuck together a while, apparently, especially since they're choosing to feed her. So he says, technically you could live without being fed, and it takes a long time for a human being to die of starvation, but you don't look appealing anymore. So they're keeping you fed so that you still look good to me, which, bummer. So she tells him, like, some fairy tales. She tells him Beauty and the Beast. And as this is all happening, like, the sun has come up. And she mentions how she's a light freak. And that when she was a kid, her mother had to get an apartment in a basement. And she got really sick. And nobody understood what was wrong with her until they got an apartment with tons of windows. And she was in the sun all the time. And then that sickness went away. And she's never been sick since. So I'm wondering if she's not a demon. Maybe she's a sun demon or a light demon or something. But she is a big fan of being in the sun and, like, stands in the rays of sun and occasionally steps out of them so that he can, like, look at her and talk to her. but he is not doing well. And when she asks him about it, he says that it's worse even than not being able to drink blood, even being tormented with her being there as food. The sunlight is the worst part for him, which surprises me a lot, because in most vampire mythologies, either being able to go out in the sunlight is totally fine, and vampires can do that. We have all methods, like there's, oh, but we're sparkly, so we don't like to be in direct sunlight in Twilight. Or there's, oh, we have these talismans that keep us safe in the sun in Vampire Diaries. Or, oh, that's just a myth. We can totally go out into the sun. It's no big deal at all in like a million other things. In this, just being near the sunlight, not even in it, being near it is draining and making him sick. Really interesting concept, because everything else, as long as you're not in direct sunlight, there could be a sunbeam, 2 inches from your face. But if you're in the shadow, you're fine. And this, it's just the fact that the sun is up and he is in a room with windows and that he can tell that there's light. That is enough to fuck him up. That's really interesting. That makes their weakness a lot more significant than just, oh, we can't go out during the day. Like, I guess if you were going to be awake during the day at all, you'd have to have all of your windows completely covered. And I'm not sure if that's really like, there's the werewolf myth. There's 2 different versions of the mythology with werewolves in terms of what makes them change. It's either it's the full moon and my body knows it's the full moon, whether I see the moon or not. And then there's ones where, oh, I didn't even realize it was the full moon, and now I'm outside and I caught a glimpse in the sky, like a cloud passes away from the front of the moon and I see it, and now I'm transforming because I'm aware of it. And I'm curious about whether or not vampire sensitivity to sunlight in this universe is my body knows the sun is up, so it's fucked up, or I am aware of it because I am here with it. Which one of those is the thing that makes him get sick? Like, because he says that normally they would sleep during the day, right? But I would imagine that sleeping underground is what you want to do. Basements, things like that, where you're like really far away from it. And does your body get sleepy because it knows that the sun is out? Or is this just, your habit now? Is this just the way that you do things now? Could you stay up during the, most people who don't work the night shift, we sleep at night and are awake during the day. And even when we do work the night shift, it's hard on our bodies to change the way that we're supposed to sleep. But we can do it. We can stay up all night. We can do it. Can vampires do that? And does that hurt them, is my question. Can they force themselves to stay awake all day? Or does that, become, a physical problem for them? And also, he encourages Ray to sleep after she tells him a story because he knows that he's going to be awake all night, and that's when she needs to worry, so she better be awake too. Because otherwise, she's just going to be a sleeping little lump of temptation over in the corner. And he can't deal with that, which I really get. Having her be awake, reminding him that she's a person with thoughts and feelings and a life and relatives and whatever, is important to him, keeping his cool. And I'm realizing now that he didn't tell her entirely what his name was because he says names have power. And she goes and tells him her brother's names right away. And then it's well, there's a bunch of Kennys. But I'm yeah, but you told him what coffee shop you work at. You told him a lot about yourself. They'll be able to piece this together, girl. The town doesn't seem that big. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. And yeah, that's where it ends. It ends with her deciding to lay down and go to sleep and follow his instructions because she's growing to trust his judgment on some things now, which is probably, I think, smart But, you know, I could potentially be very wrong about that. So I guess we'll find out. So yeah, guys, that's the first section of Sunshine. I'm wondering because Abby and Rosalie are over here in the comments of Crowdcast. Do you guys have anything that you wanted to ask me about or mention for me to like be aware of next time, or anything that you wanted to ask my impressions on before I wrap this sucker up? I really did like, this was a really interesting opening to this book, and it felt really brutal, more so than I expected. I didn't go into this with any expectations, to be honest. The only reason that I knew that there were going to be vampires involved was that it's called Sunshine, and there's a picture on the cover of like a teacup filled with blood. So, vampires, yes. But, you know, I'm reading something right now that has a vampire in it, and it's the goofiest, lamest thing ever. So I know how much vampire mileage can vary, and I just wasn't sure how this was going to go. And I'm really digging this. Vampires as monsters, you know, like really, we need more of this, I gotta say. And if you guys are into that, vampires as monsters, you really should watch the remake of, oh my God, what's the name of the movie? That Halloween movie with the vampire, and it has Colin Farrell in it. But I can't remember the name of it, but guys, go look it up. And it's a remake of an 80s movie about vampires. And I know most remakes are like garbage, but this remake is better than the original. And Colin Farrell, Fright Night, thank you, Rosie. Oh my God. Colin Farrell is a fucking scary vampire. He is a monster in this. And it is not like, is he super sexy? Yeah, he's Colin Farrell. But it's not like you want to be his bud. It's very clear. I am one thing, humans are another thing. You are food to me, and don't fuck with me. And I think it's very, very well done. So yeah, if y'all are looking for that, that's the tradition now to watch on Halloween. So check out Fright Night remake. All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to Abby and Rosie for coming to the chat, and Rosie for sponsoring this. And I think, Rosie, you commissioned for the next set of pages to be read on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. So I got to get reading on that next section. And if you're interested in reading along, I'm going to put in the show notes how Rosie broke up what I'm reading, because it's not just a flat 50 pages for each section. The book doesn't have normal like chapters, so I guess it's divided into 4 parts. And she has divided it up, like each of those parts is almost divided in half, roughly. But I'll post the page recommendations that she made. And there's just one break that she hasn't decided where it should stop. So I'll keep you all informed once we get there. So yeah, if you're interested in reading along and joining in the conversation, please do that. And this was a lot of fun. Thank you all so much. And I'm really excited about how successful this has been so far. Yay! All right, guys. I will see you very soon with another installment of Sunshine and the next episode of Veronica Mars. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.